Yeah, I'm a literary translator and cultural journalist, and I will have the pleasure to moderate tonight yet another wonderful online meeting with one of the FestivalYA authors. We have the pleasure to have here with us, at least in her digital form, Chloe Gong. And I will quickly go through a couple of, let's call them rules, so that everybody can have a pleasant experience tonight. So as you well know, this is going to be a Q&A, which means that the most important thing is that you guys ask questions or interact directly with Chloe. And I strongly encourage that because this is why you're here for. However, if by any means you cannot talk, you have any sort of technical impairment, or you're not in a very friendly environment or whatever, you can also use the chat, and I will make sure to check it and to voice your questions for you. And if you want to talk directly to Chloe, it helps me a lot if you raise your hands, either like this, like normally if you're using a camera, or if your camera is turned off, then you can use the little hand that you have on the bottom of your Zoom app. I'll just start by wishing a warm welcome to Chloe tonight and to thank her for agreeing to meet us.
Thank you for having me.
How is it for you? How is it today? You're in the United States right now, or?
Yes, I'm in New York. It's very gray, very rainy. I mean, it's my
Oh,
morning, so it looks kind of like in your same time zone too.
I see. Yeah, we're having quite a gray day today in Bucharest as well. The temperatures have dropped.
Mm,
So yeah, we can commiserate together
yeah.
because of that, I think. Um, Great. So I do have a lot of questions of my own, but I will just start by encouraging anyone who has something, I don't know, very urgent to say, or has been dying to meet you and to ask you stuff. So guys, if you have any sort of preliminary questions, or you have like very, I don't know, fervent curiosities, please, does anybody want to start? Does anybody want to ask a question or say anything? You have a list. You want to say something? Huh? Anyone?
I can
No?
say
Yes?
something.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
I don't have a question at this moment, but I just wanted to say I'm very thrilled you've organized this and very much looking forward to the entire chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure it's gonna be a brilliant experience. So while you have time to think, guys, and you're preparing your questions, which I really hope there's gonna be a lot of them, I'll take the charge to ask Chloe a couple of things. So first of all, I am quite curious about something, and it's gonna be a bit, how do I say this? Putting the cart in front of the horses, because I'm gonna ask something about cold water.
Okay.
So for those of you who might not know, Cold Wire is Chloe's most recent release. I had the chance to read an e-arc of it, which to my utter shame, I haven't finished yet because I had a lot of them at the same time. But I will say from what I've read so far that it really piqued my curiosity. And Chloe, the way you decided to spin the story is quite enthralling, and the POV is quite nice, and I'm very invested in it because it's a dystopia and I love them. So actually my question is, how did you decide to make this genre jump?
Mhm. That is a great question. Thank you for starting with that. I feel like this is something that is now so exciting for me to talk about because I've spent so long in the historical fantasy space, and now suddenly I'm writing futuristic cyberpunk dystopian. And people hear this and they're thinking, oh, that wasn't expected. But when I end up describing the book, it actually feels exactly expected for the type of stories that people have now come to understand with my brand of a sense. Most readers know me for the Secret Shanghai universe, which is, set in 1920s and 1930s Shanghai. And as much as it is about the main characters and the types of, interpersonal conflict they're going through, it is also very political. It's about these great, Western powers that were in Shanghai at the time, right after the Opium Wars, and how it then leads into civil war for the city, and working with a very, very strong world is really important to me. And so when I was thinking about the next type of story I wanted to tell, I've always been very interested in dystopian. I, like many of you here, I'm sure, grew up during the 2010s dystopian era where it was everywhere, and that was just, we couldn't get enough of it, right? Like all these stories were bringing in something very, very interesting that the Hunger Games had kind of opened up in the space. And I thought it was very interesting that a lot of YA dystopia is particularly focused on one government and the impact on the people. And I kind of had this thought experiment of what if instead it was about two governments who are in a Cold War of some sort, and it's about the people who are then dealing with the shadow of that relationship. Because to me, I think as much as we are seeing in real life, right, like the impact of one government on its people, what almost feels more, I think, what almost feels more difficult to deal with is international relations. And I studied this in school, so I think a lot of my academics really fed into that as well. But for like the past century, we keep seeing two superpower nations in our world that are at each other's throats, and that is what creates a lot of responses and laws and domestic response within countries. And that is specifically the angle I wanted to take in Cold War when it came to doing a dystopian. Because I had to think too, what is it about this dystopian that makes it different to everything else that I've read? And for me, it was this entryway into this dynamic. And it feels kind of similar to what I've always been writing in historical. It's the same type of world building, but a very, very different time period.
Yeah, it's true. And at least for me, compared whatever else I read by you, I think the voice has a different definition as well. I don't know how to put my finger on it. I mean, it's you, but it's still not you at the same time. I don't know how you feel about it as the writer.
Yes, I do think Cold War, the voice feels very different to everything else that I've done. It's primarily because Cold War is the first time I've been writing in first person through all my published works. Everything in the Secret Shanghai universe and everything in my adult series, the Flesh and False Gods trilogy, is in third person. And it's this kind of narrator talking about like Juliet did this, Roma did that. But Cold War is very, I did this, I did that. And because there are two point of views, I really needed to make them feel different, and that felt like I was taking a step back from my author voice and more just giving the reader the character directly.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it. At least I felt it while starting to read it, and I'm sure it's consistent till the end. And I just wanted to say that, I don't know, maybe besides feeling the need for a change in genre, you also felt the need for a change in voice, it seems. So I don't know, maybe this book, I might be wrong, but I don't know. It's the most personal of the books you've written so far, or at least this is how I perceive it.
That is interesting. I definitely think it's personal in the sense of when you are writing directly from the character, you have to feel like you're embodying it in some way. I think thematically, it probably is a little further away, because the shocking thing is I used to be the same ages as my characters when I was writing my first series, but now I'm getting older, but I'm still writing young adult. So this is the first time I've actually been quite far from the ages of my main characters. Like I'm writing 17-year-olds, and I'm turning 27 this year, which is very different to when I was writing these Violent Delights. I was 19 writing a 19-year-old. So that has been a strange experience.
It's still very interesting how this alters your perception and everything that you, I don't know, make your characters do and whatever. But yeah, I will definitely go back to Coldwire because yeah, that's my newest obsession, so to say. But in the meanwhile, I would really love to once again invite our people here to interact directly. So if you, in the meanwhile, have thought of any questions or any things you want to tell Chloe directly, I would strongly suggest you to profit because we have a limited time together, and I'm sure you've been dying to actually do this. So does anybody have anything to say, anything to ask, anything to, any curiosities, anything you might, okay. We have something in the chat, so I will just voice it. It's not a question, but I wanted to say thank you that you bring back to us the dystopian era, but with your twist on it. I'm so excited to read it when it comes.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I too have been dying for a return to the dystopian era. I think it came so quickly and then it was gone too quickly, and there's so much more that we can explore in it. So thank you for being excited.
Yeah, definitely. I'm totally on board with this. We have a question from Alina, and she's asking you if you can tell us a little more about your writing process.
Yes, absolutely. My writing process has actually changed a lot from when I first started. I used to give a very concrete answer where I would say, I'm a big outliner. I tend to, I see the question, if you do an outline. I used to be a very, very big outliner, and my manuscripts would essentially start from that point, and whatever I was writing would stick very closely to the outline. I used to describe my outlines as essentially a draft zero, so that when I was doing the first draft, I'd kind of already decided everything, but the first draft is when I get the prose down and when I really pay attention to my wording as opposed to just deciding what happened. But as time has gone on, I've found that my writing process changes the further I go into my professional career, because I started in, this industry, this field, just for fun, which is a little strange to say it sometimes, where, I started writing very, very young, and I didn't think about it as something I was doing for, my career or as my full-time job. I just thought of it as a hobby that I would take on myself. And that meant I had a lot of time in the world. I would spend a lot of time on the outline, then I would spend a lot of time in the drafting process. But once you start going into it as your full-time job, which this is my full-time job, I have a lot more to answer to. My editors want to know when the next draft is coming in so that they can tell design when they need to start making the book, and design can start telling production when the factories can expect the book, not to mention every single team around the world of translators who need my final manuscript to know when they are publishing their version of it. So there's a lot in the web of people who would like to know when I will be done by, which means nowadays I start working backward almost, where I know this is when my draft is due. And I take a lot less time in outlining. I just kind of go into the writing process and throw it into the machine and the machine of publishing. And my editor will come back to me and tell me, we can work on these things and do that. And my back and forth with her is a lot quicker than it would be if I was doing it on my own. So my writing process nowadays looks more like I do still outline, but it's a lot more sparser. It's instead of describing the whole chunk of what's going to happen in the first half of the book, I'll do a few lines and I'll do a few like critical elements I need to follow. Sometimes if I find it helpful to describe what's happening between two characters, I'll go a bit more in depth. But just by nature of needing to work on a schedule and needing to, really put in my best work without sacrificing the professional elements of it, my writing process has changed from what it used to be. But I think for, in case there are aspiring authors in the audience, I think when you start out, it is really, really important to think about it as the type of hobby writing where you are taking the time that you need, as opposed to like learning from me and doing like, well, Chloe said she doesn't outline, so I'm just going to go for it. because that has been something I only know how to do after years of figuring out my own process. Everyone's process is very, very different, and you need to stick with what works best for you. So, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's quite nice. Actually, I was kind of expecting you to say that your process has been changing as long as you evolved in your career, as you expressed yourself. And I'm going to keep us in the same area for a couple of minutes because we received some questions on the chat, but I would like to put them in the right order so that we stay in the same spot. So in terms of world building, what are your favorite areas to explore and bring to life? Those you enjoy the most, and what are your least favorite?
Ooh, that is a great question. I enjoy almost every aspect of world building, but my least enjoyable elements are the elements I forget about. And what I mean by that is world building is one of my favorite things to do. I think really considering what makes a society function and what spurs on character motivation because of the place they hold in society is something that happens across all of my books. And I do try to go as in depth as possible without sacrificing story, right? I think something I hear most often that I have to try to balance with what I want to do of my books is that a lot of constructive criticism will say, if you spend a lot of time describing the city we are in, we have not heard about what happens with the plot for like 5 pages now. You might need to pare it down. I'm like, yeah, I understand that. I get that. And so I try to juggle the in between of I describe as much as I want to describe without sacrificing, slowing down what the characters are doing, what their the conflict and the plot movement on the page. That being said, I think sometimes I will focus in on the things that I like doing that I'll ignore certain elements such as travel time or like geographical like sense. And I think about this a lot when it comes to my adult fantasy series is one of the main places where I've been doing kind of like world building on a level of this is a entirely new invention. I'm not really taking from historical inspiration or current time inspiration. I'm just trying to work with whatever history I find interesting and whatever epic fantasy world building I find interesting. And I think there have been many, many moments when I'm writing and I'm thinking, I need these characters to get from one end of the kingdom to the other in like 2 days. But feasibly, I've probably made it that travel time is 1 week. And at that point, my hands are tied. There's nothing I can do except in the narrative say, and then they had to be on a horse for 1 week. And to me, that is horrible because I'm suddenly bound by the rules of my world building. But it makes a lot more sense to follow those rules than to suddenly throw at my reader and say, anyway, now it took them 2 days, because someone would be very mad at me, probably.
Yeah, I was just trying to picture that actually. And speaking of kingdoms, we have a question from Lorelai, and she says, what role does setting, real or imaginary, play in shaping your stories?
Mm-hmm. Setting is so important to me. When I think about what comes to me first, setting is usually at the very top because I think the setting informs who we're going to follow and who these characters are, and also what type of story emerges. So, with these Violent Delights, the first thing that came to me was 1920 Shanghai, because 1920 Shanghai in true history is when we saw rival gangsters. And knowing that in true history we had rival gangsters, that's how my story emerged of what if this was about two families in a blood feud and their children were somehow, they had a history and now they have to work together. That kind of story only emerges because I'm thinking of 1920 Shanghai. And if we moved the whole story into another period of time or another setting, it would fall apart because it is fundamentally built on top of it. In the same way, I think with Coldwire as a dystopian, the setting makes the theme and the setting makes what I'm trying to say with the book. So because I have set it in they kind of jump between these two countries that are enemy countries. Like these governments are fundamentally opposed to each other. These countries both want to be the dominant superpower in the world, but only one of them could truly have a real sphere of influence because they're diametrically opposed. And that kind of setting is how I came up with the fact that what I'm most interested in exploring is a character who feels like she doesn't belong in either world. So we've got two main characters who are both ethnically of one country, but loyal to the other because that is who their nationality stands with. And I think it relies so heavily on that setting that, again, if we kind of made it so that they only existed in one country or that world power type relationship was gone, it just wouldn't be that story anymore. So all of that to say, I really think it is my first place of information. And it kind of means that I'm a very, I think, world building and the character's dynamic to that world heavy writer. I think a lot of other people are character heavy writers, or, you know, they go for the plot and see where that and then kind of structure comes out. But for me, setting is just irremovable from the first starting place.
Well, that's very interesting to hear, and it also brings me to some other questions of my own, but at the same time we're having quite a lot of them in the chat, which makes me very happy. But first of all, I would like to give the floor to Bella in the library.
Hi, I'm so happy to have the chance to be here and talk to you. This Violence Disliked is one of the books that has impacted me the most recently, both through the story itself and the depth with which you've built the characters and the world around them. At university, I took a course where we studied contemporary fantasy literature and talked a lot about themes like teratologic imaginary. That is how monsters or fantastic creatures reflect fears, trauma, and social tension. Reading your book, I immediately thought about how well it would fit into that course. The monster affecting the city, the people become victims of an invisible force, the political tensions between gangs. All these elements work both as a gripping story and as a very powerful metaphor. I would have loved for us to analyze this from an academic perspective, because this Violence Disliked is not just a reinterpretation of a classic story, it's also a very subtle reflection on violence, identity, and loyalty. It was a read that moved me from start to finish, and it really stayed with me long after I finished it. And thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. I'm so honored to hear that, because I actually also took a class on monsters in film and literature as I was writing these Found Delights. So the shocking thing is I'd come up with a monster storyline before taking that class. And after I'd finished that first draft, I took that class, and just as you were describing, we were learning about what do monsters stand for in society? What are they really there to represent? And I went back to my first draft and I went, oh my God, this is a metaphor. And so for my later drafts, I really leaned into that, and to have the idea of it being academic study is something I've always wanted. So thank you for saying that. I hope it happens one day.
Thank you indeed, and I also leave the floor to Ioana.
Hi, Chloe. Nice to meet you in this on this occasion. Since we were talking until now about your writing process, I was more curious about the way you develop your characters. So, in this Violent Delights, Roma and Juliet clearly depicts or echo Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But I was more curious about at what point in the drafting process did they start feeling like actual people, you know, more rather than retellings?
That is a great question. So with these Violent Delights, I think I had a very interesting process, because as you said, they are originally Shakespeare characters. And so I am adapting them more so than I am inventing them out of nowhere, right? Which has been an interesting experience in comparison to Cold War, where it's not a Shakespeare retelling, so I come up with them entirely myself, and they've been very different processes. But with Romeo and Juliet, I started with them as plucking what I felt was the most interesting thing of their Shakespearean counterparts. So they are very different to Romeo and Juliet, but I still think I pulled what I felt was a thread that we kind of see of the original plays. And I perceive it as you drop that little thread into a whole new setting, because the setting is so important. And what would 1920s Shanghai and that environment do to these characters? So I think by the time I was in my first draft, midway through my second draft, these characters already had a lot of life to me because I'd run through the entire story with them once. But the thing about a first draft is that it's always the worst iteration the story can ever be. Like I always tell people, try to write the messiest first draft you can, because the most important thing is not that the first draft is perfect, it's that the first draft is finished. Because you can only go back and fix something that's finished. You can't fix a blank page. So I really felt like by the time we had the first draft, Romeo and Juliet were living, breathing people, but they were still not quite there yet, because it probably took until the third or the fourth draft that I had really figured out who these people are and what their motivations were, and not just little talking puppets that I was trying to tell my story through. And that has changed. Like that differs for me a lot. I think with other books, sometimes it's faster to discover who this person is. Sometimes characters are actively hiding from me, and it takes like the second to last draft before I figure out, oh, this is what makes you tick, and this is what has brought you to life in my perception. But by the time the book is done, all of them I've figured out. But as for how quick it is in the process, it depends on who it is, because sometimes it'll completely vary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I'd like to keep the discussion right where it is now. So I will revert a bit the order of the questions in the chat, and I will take Malina's question. And she says, I have a question regarding the inspiration from Romeo and Juliet. Your version of Juliet and Romeo feels like they're fighting fate with all their might. Were you consciously rewriting Shakespeare's fatalism on destiny into something more about agency, or do you think tragedy always finds them no matter the choices?
Oh, that is a great question. I wasn't quite fighting against Shakespeare's themes, I think. I definitely wanted to do what I felt was an interpretation on tragedy, because I didn't want to lose that element. I think this is what feels most important to me when I am talking about the entire, at this point now, the Secret Shanghai universe is the 4 books and the novellas, and they all kind of feed back into that larger universe. But it was important to me that these violent delights and our violent ends for Romeo and Juliet's story could relatively stand alone. I think anyone who wanted to read it and interpret it as that is the ending of their story still can, even though it does continue onward with the spin-off duology. I'm going to assume that I can spoil it. Like, I'm sure everyone here has probably read the first 2 books at least, but I wanted it so that even though they don't actually die, there is still a certain death in their standing in society and this empire that they once held, that their families have been building for so long. And to me, that was where the tragedy occurred. This idea that they have kept their lives, they have kept each other, but they can never go home to what is undeniably home to them. And I think that both it engages with what Shakespeare was trying to do with this idea of these 2 teenagers can only get away from this fate by killing themselves. But I didn't think it was as valuable to just kill these characters off in this new setting that I'd given them, because I wanted to work with it in a way where these 2 characters are not responsible for what has happened to them, but as soon as they are responsible for it in some way, as in, rising up to their legacy, that is what they deny, and that is the action that they take. So in a way, I think it was very, it veered away from the Shakespearean idea of tragedy, but I still wanted to encapsulate the Romeo and Juliet tragedy.
We're gonna stay with Romeo and Juliet a bit longer because Ilaria is asking why Romeo and Juliet, respectively, as you like it. Did Shakespeare play a big role in your beginnings or inspire you to become a writer?
Great question. I kind of accidentally stumbled onto These Violent Delights being a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but Foul Lady Fortune was very intentionally an As You Like It retelling. And so what happened was, as I mentioned before, I wanted to write something that was set in 1920 Shanghai. I thought that was such an interesting time period. And because my parents are both from Shanghai, I'd grown up hearing about the city a lot. And there's just a lot of pride that I think people who are from Shanghai have for their city and the times of like strife and war that the city has gone through, and to have emerged out of it in a way that has very much informed the people and the people's character. So I had done some preliminary research into 1920 Shanghai, and I really loved that in true history, it was essentially ruled by gangsters. So as a very short history lesson on Shanghai, at the time, China had just lost the Opium Wars. And because of that, Britain, France, and America had carved up Shanghai essentially to have extraterrestrial rights, not extraterrestrial, that's alien, extrajudiciary like rights in some way of like effectively they had the law on their side on their streets. Like it wasn't Chinese law that parts of Shanghai had to follow, it was British law or it was French law. And that meant police was essentially useless and the gangsters were the true, reigning power. So I looked at that and I thought, oh my God, I should do like a gangsters at war and a blood feud story that is talking about equal power in the face of imperial power. So we had all these like imperial powers in the 1920s, and I wanted to work with the local, Chinese gangsters and Russian gangsters at the time who had really come in as refugees. But then I looked at that elevator pitch and I went, no one is going to hear this and not say, so this is Romeo and Juliet. You're just redoing Romeo and Juliet. And I really loved Shakespeare in high school. I did really enjoy studying those themes and really thinking about what it is about Shakespeare that has, made him last 400 years in impact. And it was at that point that I decided I want to do a Romeo and Juliet retelling. Because I think because the themes are similar enough, it feels so much more impactful to meet the story where it is and to use a new lens onto a very old story and almost see what new findings I can bring to something very old and make that more accessible to people than try to claim that I'm completely reinventing the wheel with a star-crossed lover story, because I'm not. That story's been told thousands and thousands of times. So it was a bit of an accident for These Violent Delights to end up as a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but I think it really worked for it because, people aren't as familiar with 1920 Shanghai, but they're very familiar with Romeo and Juliet. And so when you get a pitch like Romeo and Juliet in 1920 Shanghai, I think that made it very quickly accessible and people could envision what story they were going to get, as opposed to a very unfamiliar, structure that they might be a little scared to enter. And so when I wrote Foul Lady Fortune as the spinoff, at that point, I was like, I have to keep doing Shakespeare retellings. This is such a good little like corner to live in. And coincidentally, I'd already renamed my Rosaline of Romeo and Juliet into Rosalind. And the main character in As You Like It is a Rosalind. And I started looking into that play, I read it, and I thought these themes about how you are not your parents, you are not your inherited treason, you can run away from, what society has tried to make of you into this like forest type escape. It was perfect for the kinds of, I think, ideas I wanted to explore in that next iteration. And so I just kept doing Shakespeare retellings.
Yeah, that's actually quite great, and I think it partially answers another question, but I'll come back to it in a while about pitching and about how do you work with potential publishing houses and so on and so forth. But now I'd like to stay a bit more in the, let's go Shakespeare-related area. I have one last question in the chat about that. So we have, do you feel the role of tragedy has shifted since ancient to present times to support new functions within human nature and society overall? Or do you feel it is one of the constants of this world?
That is a great question. That is a question I feel like I could only think about because I was an English major. I'm like, damn, you gave me that question like it was an essay. That is a good question. I feel that tragedy has always functioned very similarly as far as human storytelling has gone, because tragedy is catharsis, right? You read it and you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, but you still sign up for it anyway because you're thinking maybe this time it'll be different. At least that's how I perceive tragedy. I think there's such a relieving feeling when you get to the end of the story and it has kind of happened in a way that you expected it, and at the same time you've watched the worst thing in the world happen to someone else, but you as the reader, as the viewer, as the play watcher are still okay. You've gone through all those emotions, but you are okay. I think that's why humans have always loved horror movies. I think that's why they've always loved tragic, like disaster movies. It is always that response and seeking out storytelling that is engaging with that in some way. As for whether that has changed over time, I do think our society now is a little bit more afraid of tragedy. I don't know if that's to do with modern living. I don't know if it's because of our social media age where we see way too much of people in a way where we are starting to lose empathy because of just absolute chronic, bombardment of disaster happening all the time. But I think people are really afraid of tragic stories now because you see Hollywood, critically bomb a movie for not having a happy ending. You see a lot of over-reliance on this idea that things need to be wrapped up neatly in a bow. And it even kind of goes into this idea that this is not a dig at the romance genre, because I love the romance genre, but I think romance also gets really, really big at a time where we need that comfort of a guaranteed good ending in opposition to a tragic ending. I think it really does signal what's going on in our society. I hope that's as concise as I can keep it. I could also, write a thesis on this, but I'll wrap it up there.
You do have a reply in the chat saying that if you want to write an essay about that, you will be happily read it. Good. So I'll split a bit the order of the questions in the chat so that we can go through all of them hopefully. So I just want to ask Amalia, because she also raised her hand, if it's the same question as in the chat or it's a different one. If Amalia is with us.
Yes, I'm here. So it's not the same one, actually.
Okay,
Hi,
you can voice both of them if you want to.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep them in order. Firstly, I love Chloe's books. They are my all-time favorite. Oh, and I'm just obsessed. I'm sorry, I'm fangirling right now. So in the first question was if you relate particularly with any of your characters in special, and the second one is if you knew from the beginning the turn the OG duology was going to take, or if not, when did you realize with the thing that I'm going to do this? And thank you. I'm sorry.
No, those are great questions. So with a character that I relate to most, I think of all the characters I've written so far, I put the most of myself into Rosalind from Fatality Fortune. I do try not to do that too often, because I think the thing about writing books and creating any sort of art is that the art does need to stand apart, and the art is what is going to get, criticized or praised or anything of that caliber. People have reactions to the art, and if you put too much of yourself into it and people say, I hated this character was so annoying, you're going to be like, okay, ow. So I try not to do that too often. I don't think that I've put so much of myself into anything ever that I would have that reaction. But as far as I think someone who's, you know, narrative arc and feelings of like needing to work through something, Rosalind's story is very near and dear to me. Especially because that was the third book that I'd ever published, which meant, you know, 1 and 2 was very much like my firstborns. Like those were characters that I kind of sent out into the world and, you know, grew with me. Rosalind is the character that I feel like at that point I was writing as a professional author, and I really need to figure out what my rhythm was. So there's just a lot in her story that I think was happening at a very like precarious time in my life, and you can feel that in the pages. And as for when do I feel, what's the question? When do I feel like the duology is taking, like, when do I know what is happening, or like if things surprise me, or was it specifically for one of them? If you're still
Yes, it was if you knew from the beginning the turn the events are going to take from the OG evolving into the Foul Lady Fortune universe and so on.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I knew from the second draft. I've said this like kind of low key over the years because I'm still afraid of spoiling people if they haven't read it yet. So if you haven't read the books yet, cover your ears right now. But in the original draft of the duology, I actually killed them off. Like they were like dead. They were not alive. They didn't even like run away. They were just dead. But I wrote it and I thought, I just don't think this is what I'm trying to say. I don't actually think this is the themes that I feel are most relevant for my story. I think I'm just trying out this ending because Shakespeare did it. And when the book sold to the publisher, it was originally one book. So these Momentalites and Our Valentines were kind of mushed together. But when it sold, they said, we need to break this apart. Too much is happening at like all the time. We could make 2 books and you can really take the time to develop the second half of the manuscript and make it book 2. And when I wrote the second draft of that manuscript and broke it apart, that's when I figured everything out for this is how the duology is going to end. This is the outcome that these characters are going to have. And then I want to write Foul Lady Fortune as the spinoff because all these characters kind of have a resolution in some way, except for Rosalind. She just suffered through the entire duology. And I was like, I think there's something here that warrants a story. So it was the second run of a first draft that when I figured out the shape of it, that's when I knew what the duology would look like.
Thank you.
Good. So if Amalia is satisfied with her answers, I'm going to take Anna's question as well because it's a bit related to Amalia's first question. So Anna is curious, which character was the most fun to write?
Oh, I always, it's so hard to answer this question because a lot of characters are fun in different ways. I think when I was writing the first duology, Marshall is just the comedic relief. So he was so much fun. In the spinoff, I think the dynamic between Rosalind and Orion really kept my attention through all the pages because their back and forth is just, it's so funny. And then similarly, Elisa through all the books has just always been the most random kind of comic relief. Like she's a bit of a jester sometimes. She's just kind of there. She'll just do things and it's really hilarious. But I guess, yeah, my answer on this will just change by the day. Like depending on who I've last been thinking about as the most fun, I'll end up switching my answer. But at least those tend to be the usual answers.
Thank you so much for this, and I'm going to keep it in the fun and light zone with a question from Theodora. It might be a silly question, but did you always ship Benvolio and Mercutio, or did it come to you after you got the concept of these violent delights and the new Marshall and Benedict?
That's a great question. That is a critical question that you do need to ask every Shakespeare retelling author. I did. I read Romeo and Juliet, and I was like, I think Benvolio and Mercutio had a romance off stage, and we just didn't see it. You know, it never quite made sense to me why retellings don't focus in on that. I've read a lot of retellings that do a romance between Benvolio and Rosaline instead. I read a lot of retellings that do a romance between like Benvolio and people love pairing Benvolio off with everyone under the sun except for Mercutio. And to me, that never made sense. I think what Shakespeare gives us in the text kind of supports their dynamic. And so when I started writing these Valentinites, I went in for sure with the intention of like Marshall and Benedict are going to be in love. They are already in love essentially when we meet them, but they will fall in love throughout the course of the books. Yeah, great question.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is just great. Also for me to know. I'm very happy that you have this theory in mind, dear Chloe. And then I'm going to keep it in the fun zone, so to say, with a question from Anna Enne. She says, I know that you mentioned that you were listening to Hopeless Fountain Kingdom by Halsey while writing these Valentinites. So I wanted to ask, what's your favorite Halsey song?
Oh my God, that is so hard. I could pick a favorite song off like every album. I really love Eyes Closed. That was the one that I think was on repeat most out of the Hopeless Fountain Kingdom album. I tend to choose a Halsey album for almost every book I write. I feel like, you know, as much as I also have fun pairing Taylor Swift albums with my books, it's actually easier to pair Halsey albums with my books because I feel like they've really matched like every era into all of my books. So Eyes Closed was like on repeat through the entirety of drafting these Valentinites. It was just, it really, I think the whole like sonic tone of that album matched it perfectly. That being said, I will always be fond of Badlands because that was the first album, obviously, that I had heard from Halsey. And I feel like saying Colors off that would just be too cliche because, like, you know, it's Colors. But Colors and Gasoline, great songs. I think they really, Gasoline really fits Cold Wire. I think that has kind of become its like anthem song as I'm drafting. And since the 10-year anniversary edition just came out, now there are orchestral versions of it that I have on repeat all the time while I'm drafting.
That's great that you gave me something to listen to while finishing Cold Wire. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to jump a bit towards your impact upon people because we have a question from Lorelei saying, your books are incredibly popular on BookTok. Do you feel you write differently, knowing that your work may spread through social media trends?
Oh, that is a great question. It is also funny because there's no denying that I think BookTok was so important to the start of my career. When I was first published with my first book, the publication was in 2020. So you can imagine all the bookstores were closed. It was very hard to do traditional methods of marketing, of publicity. And I think without BookTok, like to be completely honest, people would just have never heard of my book. I think the beauty of social media is that it gets things in front of people. And if things are never in front of people, they can't even discover whether they like it or they hate it, right? Because they've never encountered it in the first place. But I do think, relatively speaking, I kind of had my heyday like in 2020. And I've drifted off more into this space of people who find me on BookTok now tend to be my existing readers. They're people who came to find me after they discovered my books. They're people who have been following me for a long time. And I don't feel any pressure nowadays because I've been very, I think I've become accustomed to who my audience is and who I'm writing for and who I always try to keep in mind as my, you know, extreme target audience. Like first and foremost, the book needs to be what I want it to be. And then I think about the ring outside of the people who already love my other books. And I'm thinking, you know, what is it that will get them excited? And what is it that will create discussion? And what is it that is going to feel fulfilling to them? Because then I'm also thinking about how I was as a reader back in my like obsessive fan reading days. And then in the ring above it, I'm thinking of my general audience and what I feel will be, you know, acceptable for the teen audience or the adult audience, depending on which book I'm writing. And I think there was a period of time in like 2022 where I was still early on in my career where I was thinking, you know, do I need to fit in more with what other BookTok books are? Like a lot of BookTok books are very, very romance centered. And do I need to do more of that? Do I need to do more of this? But I think I found, like in my creative process, I think I found a good, you know, this is why I write and this is what is important to me. And no matter what the market is off doing and what other people are writing, those aren't my books. Those aren't the stories I'm trying to tell. I just have to let them go do their own thing and I have to do my own thing. And I trust that my readers will enjoy it and my readers will find it. And to me, it's more worthwhile to do things that are experimental because that's what I had wanted to do. And that's what will feel more timeless as things go on, as opposed to, I think if I tried hard to fit what was currently going on in the market, it could feel outdated in a few years because then I was just trying to do what everyone else was doing. And I don't want to do that. And I think I've made my peace with it. So now there's a lot less pressure.
Really, really loving this. I think it's a very mature attitude towards whatever is going on the market right now. And I really appreciate you for saying that. Okay, we are right in this area, so I'll take two of Rebecca's questions. The first one is, have you ever struggled with writer's block?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like writer's block is one of those things that people kind of imagine it from like the movies where you're just sitting there and you're twiddling your thumbs and you're like, oh, I can't write. But to me, writer's block sometimes feels like you are still writing. It just feels wrong. Like something about it feels very, very wrong. And it usually is a sign that I've gone astray somewhere in my book and I need to revisit this chapter. Like something about it just does not feel right. It feels like I'm pulling teeth to get it out. I need to revisit it. Other times, if I really am not writing at all and I'm just like, oh no, I can't do anything, it's probably because I'm burnt out and I've overworked myself. And I find that if I just take some time away from the books and go outside and see the sun and touch the grass, it really, really helps with writer's block.
Yeah, that's always a good solution when you have it. But I'm gonna brighten up the mood a bit and take Rebecca's other question, which is, what's your favorite book, both that you've written, but also by other authors that have inspired you?
Oh my God, that is such a hard question. I can't pick a favorite book with the ones that I've written because I feel like it's like picking a favorite child. Like they're all special in their own unique ways, and I would be a terrible mother by picking a favorite. So I have to abstain from that. With favorite books by other people, I grew up with a set of like favorites that I think have really stayed with me into adulthood. Because when I think about books that I revisit often and books that I feel like are fundamental to my sense of self, it's The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I mean, the entire Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare, but also just like all the Shadowhunters books. For as long as she's writing them, I'm gonna read them. Like you can't pull me away from those books like ever. And also Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I think those books I read very, very young, but I would do rereads of them often, even as I was getting older, and they have never lost their magic for me. I think they're really they defined who I was like as a teenager when I was seeking that escapism, but as an adult, I think they encapsulate such a magical part of coming of age and teenagerhood that they're very special to me.
I think you've just listed up a couple of everyone's favorites, or at least, I don't know, one by one much. Okay, before asking how much time we have still got, because there might not be as much as we'd like to, I would like to give the floor again to Ioana for a very short question, if possible.
Yes, it is actually short, but it's more of a curiosity. I'm not sure if you have thought about this before, but you probably did. If These Violent Delights were to be adapted tomorrow into a movie or whatever, do you have someone specific in mind? That's like a specific casting for Romeo and Juliet and for any other characters?
Great question. And unfortunately, I don't have a dream fan cast. And I think it's hard because when Hollywood casts for like teen movies, they tend to find unknown actors because of course there aren't that many like young actors around. And so I mean, if you go look on my Pinterest boards, I've pinned people who I think would make good adult versions of them, but I do not know who would play teen versions. It's just there aren't enough people in Hollywood.
Thank you very much. I was assuming so, but I wanted to make sure because the curiosity was killing us all probably.
Great. So I'll just quickly check how much time we have.
2 minutes.
Oh, amazing. I'm just going to ask the rest of the questions in 2 minutes then. Chloe, do you mind staying for 5 minutes more? Maybe we can squeeze in 3 questions.
Yes, of course, sure.
Okay, that's perfect. So I'm going to try to be very, very quick. So let's see. Other than Shakespeare, what other retelling would you want to write?
I've always wanted to work with one of the like ancient Greek tragedies. Like I love I feel like Medea is so interesting. There's another one where I'm like completely blanking on who it was, but there's just a lot like I know that Hades and Persephone retellings are like so like common now. I think there'd be something really interesting to do with it in relation, not like a retelling of that exactly, but those stories I think are very, very interesting.
Okay, this sounds very promising. I'm gladly supporting that, just so you know. Do you think music is essential in illustrating raw emotions?
I feel like music is very, very helpful, especially in getting into the mindset of what you're writing. I know that some people write in complete silence, which is so wild to me. I don't think I could do it. I write with music in all the time. The thing is, I don't necessarily write with music that fits the mood. Sometimes I'll just have something playing that generally, you know, gets me into like the creative processes. But I do think if I'm writing something intense, like a death scene or like a battle scene, I'll listen to music that is very specific to that because it really helps me get into the mindset. So I think it can be very, very helpful.
It's good. I'm one of those people who translates in complete silence. I'm sorry, guilty as charged. I cannot really listen to anything while doing that. So yeah, I'm the weirdo. Right. So I'm just gonna pick one last question. I'm really, really sorry and apologizing to the few people I might have missed questions from. But I would like to encourage you guys to follow Chloe on Instagram and generally on social media. And who knows, maybe you can also interact a bit over there. I've been following her for a while and she does wild stuff over there. I really am a fan of her videos and everything that she does. So I'm going to take Rebecca's question about how do you come up with an idea for a new book? Do you start with the characters, the story, the world, or the message you want to transmit?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, you know, I know this is the worst answer, but it depends. It depends on it depends on what book it is. It depends on at what stage I've kind of thought about it. I find that sometimes I'll end up working on a story idea that I thought up years and years ago. For example, Coldwire is it's an idea, it's a seed of an idea that despite publishing in 2025, I think I probably conceptualized that in 2017, or I didn't quite know what it was going to be, but I knew I wanted to do something that was futuristic. I wanted to do something that was, you know, talking about governments and class and virtual reality and something in the vein of that. But it really depends every time what that one element is that suddenly makes an idea feel real. And that's why I always encourage taking the time you need, because I think a lot of times ideas only really crystallize once you have that aha light bulb moment. And suddenly this is a book. Like suddenly there's enough there that you could chew on it for 300, 400 pages. Because I think the worst thing is to accidentally start something too early and realize you didn't have your main core yet. You didn't have your beating heart of the story. And I think every book, before I start it, I need to know what that beating heart is. Sometimes it can be a character. Sometimes it can be a specific thing I want to do with the setting, or sometimes it can be the theme of the message. But I need to have decided that first, and it needs to feel super real to me. Which again, I know this is such an unhelpful answer for people who are aspiring writers hoping to have like a roadmap of some sort. But if there's any advice I can give on that front, it's to consider what it is that you would call like the thesis of your book, and really work on that before you start it.
This is great advice, and I also think it actually answers a couple of other questions that have been unintentionally left out because of the time from the chat.
Doing double duty.
yeah, it's just perfect that you came up with this answer. Thank you. So just to end this in a proper way, I would very much like to thank you, Chloe, for your patience and your availability. And I would like to thank Cărturești for organizing this event, and to Corinthians, which is a Corint imprint and is actually facilitating the availability of your books in Romanian for us all. And I am really rooting for Coldwire to be translated in Romanian as well. I know it's just, coming up now on the market and people need to read it first, but I really would like to see it as well. And yeah, what can I say? It was a real pleasure to talk to you. As some people have said and suggested, if you feel like writing any sorts of, essays or takes on whatever has been discussed tonight,
Right.
I'll happily read it.
Yeah.
For sure. And I can see Mariuca wanting to say something. Do you? No, nothing.
No.
Okay, so then we're good as it is. And just to end it in a nice way, I don't know, Chloe, if you have any sort of short message for your readers in Romania, please go for it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun to do. I love doing international travel, and I know it's not feasible all the time. So to have this as a virtual option, I think is so much fun. I hope I get to make it over to Romania one day. I think that'd be so fun. I've always wanted to go. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. I appreciate all the questions. They were great questions, by the way. And it's been lovely to chat. I hope we get to do this again, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We're really waiting for you, Chloe. Okay, have a lovely day, and everybody have a lovely evening.